Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world. The paths canon never walked, the choices that might have changed everything. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. The Forbidden Forest holds its breath. No phoenix song, no inner monologue of acceptance, no quiet martyr walking to his death. In this timeline, the boy who lived steps into the clearing, looks into the red eyes that have haunted his nightmares, and does something the wizarding world has never prepared itself to imagine. He lowers his wand. Wands rise around him in a jagged circle of authority and fear. Death Eaters freeze mid-breath, every mask suddenly too tight, every heartbeat loud in the vast, unnatural silence. Voldemort's hand stills in the air, the killing curse unspoken, his serpent-like face arrested in a moment of predatory calculation. Harry Potter, the supposed savior, drops to one knee in the mud and ash of the forest floor, lifts his gaze and whispers to the man who murdered his parents, "Teach me." The wizarding world operates under a fundamental delusion that Harry James Potter was destined to be their shield, their Gryffindor champion, their final defense against the dark. They are wrong. From the cupboard under the stairs to the corridors of Hogwarts, Harry was never a saint in training. He was a weapon in search of a wielder, a volatile convergence of trauma, loyalty, and buried rage waiting for someone ruthless enough to name its value. Voldemort does not move at first. He studies the boy with methodical certainty, feeling the strange soul resonance of the Horcrux coiled inside Harry's chest answer his own fractured spirit. Around them, the Death Eaters shift, unable to process the image. The Chosen One kneeling before the Dark Lord, like a masterpiece to be moulded, not an enemy to be destroyed. The forest becomes a fortress of silence, the war narrowing to a single decision point. From here, history does not merely bend, it fractures. Imagine the compressed echoes of the years that follow. A Hogwarts where prefect badges share space with concealed dark marks beneath school robes, where green and silver banners no longer need to hide their ambition. In this Slytherin timeline, patrols through the castle are led not by Dumbledore's army, but by Harry himself, tactically lethal, clinically efficient, enforcing order in the name of peace. The Daily Prophet's front page does not warn of a hunted rebel. It celebrates a smiling chosen one standing beside the ministry, while the Order of the Phoenix retreats underground, hiding from the boy they once called Hope. This is not a tale of a pure heart slowly corrupted. It is a story of alignment, of anger finally given permission to act, of a boy who was punished for asking questions, discovering a mentor who rewards every uncomfortable demand for truth, then sharpens it into doctrine. Harry's hunger for meaning, for control, for an end to chaos does not vanish. It is disciplined, weaponized, and pointed back at the world that failed him. So if, in that clearing, at the supposed end of all things, Harry chooses to kneel instead of die, does the prophecy shatter, its promise broken by his allegiance, or does it evolve into something far more terrifying, binding light and dark together in a single, obedient blade? In the next section, we trace how the forest becomes the first classroom of Harry's new education under Voldemort's gaze. Halloween 1981, the night the prophecy bent. But the forest is only the echo of an older night. To understand how Harry can ever kneel to Voldemort, we have to return to the first time their lives collided. Halloween 1981, Godric's Hollow. The Wizarding World narrates this evening as a triumph of sacrificial love over unspeakable evil, the birth of a legend called the Boy Who Lived. They are wrong. In this timeline, that night is not a victory. It is the drafting of a blueprint. Voldemort does not apparate to the Potter's cottage as a reckless tyrant chasing a half-remembered prophecy. He arrives with methodical certainty, the words of Sybil Trelawney dissected and reassembled until their gaps are more revealing than their promises. Born as the 7th month dies, marked as his equal, the prophecy names an equal, a threat, a pivot point in war, but nowhere, he notices, does it decree that the child must be his enemy. The omission is a quiet, devastating permission. The front door falls. Jane's dies buying seconds, not salvation. Upstairs, the nursery is a fortress of toys and false safety. Lily stands between crib and killer, and the script appears to hold. She begs. He refuses. She dies. The silence afterward is surgical, a pause in which history waits to be written, and then it bends. Voldemort steps to the crib and feels it, a low, uncanny vibration at the edge of perception, as if the air itself is humming. Soul resonance. In canon, this is a metaphor fans invoke to explain their connection. In this Slytherin timeline, it is an actual, magical phenomenon, a harmonic alignment between the Dark Lord's fractured soul and the infant's raw, unshaped power. Harry's magic does not recoil from him. It leans in, curious, almost welcoming. He recalculates in an instant. Why waste an equal when one can forge an heir? The killing curse he raises is not the simple, clean Avada Kedavra of battlefield executions. It is a ritualized construct, threaded with intention, to kill the body, yes, but also to anchor a fragment of himself in the only vessel prophesied to stand at his level. Not an accidental Horcrux, but a masterpiece to be moulded, a living reliquary, a weapon being polished in the dark before it can even speak. The spell strikes. Lily's protection still flares, ancient and incandescent, and the curse rebounds, but its failure is partial, not absolute. Voldemort's body is shredded, his presence scattered, yet the tether he wove holds. A more stable echo of him nests behind Harry's scar. Not just raw pain, but slivers of memory, instinctive cruelty, the cold architecture of ambition, compressed like a seed awaiting spring. From that night, Harry is misnamed. The world celebrates the boy who lived. Newspapers crown a savior. Parents tell bedtime stories about a child who defeated death itself. In this timeline, they are venerating the wrong miracle. What lies in the crib is the vessel that waits, a container designed to one day house, merge with, or stand beside the Dark Lord, its identity already entangled with another will. Voldemort, drifting and disembodied, does not consider himself defeated. He considers himself invested. He believes he has just built a prototype. The question that will haunt every year after Godric's Hollow is not whether Harry can destroy Voldemort, but whether, when the echo grows loud enough to speak, he will still want to. In the next section, we follow how that whisper matures, subtle at first, then tactically lethal, as Harry's childhood is quietly steered toward the role his maker intended, a childhood haunted by a voice, the hidden dark prince. That whisper does not stay theoretical. It wakes up on Privet Drive. In this timeline, Number 4 is not merely a suburban prison, it is a laboratory. The Horcrux, lodged behind Harry's scar, is not dormant for a decade, waiting for Quirrell to knock it awake. It stirs early, its soul resonance leaking in thin, icy threads into the dreams of a boy who has no language for magic, only for hunger and humiliation. The world will later insist that Harry's childhood was merely tragic. They are wrong. The first shift is in how he sees. Canon Harry moves through the Dursleys' house as a bewildered victim, flinching from every raised voice. Here, the perspective tilts. Harry lies in his cupboard and watches shadows stretch under the door with a cold, curious attention that does not belong to an 11-year-old. Vernon's rants, Petunia's sharp intakes of breath, Dudley's stomping tantrums, these become data points, patterns. His fear does not vanish. It is categorized, placed in mental drawers by an emerging, methodical certainty. Punishment becomes experiment. How late can he return from the schoolyard before Vernon's face turns purple instead of merely red? Which chores, if done with silent, unnerving precision, unsettle Petunia enough that she avoids eye contact and forgets to assign more? Harry tests boundaries the way other children test toys, nudged by that pressure behind his thoughts that is not yet a voice, but feels like an ancient hand on the back of his mind, steering, a weapon being polished in the dark. Emotionally, the change is even more profound. Canon Harry's anger is explosive, directionless, flaring and then collapsing into guilt. Here, the anger finds an ally. When Dudley shoves him into the pavement and the laughter closes in, something inside does not merely hurt. It observes, judges, and agrees. You are meant for more than this. The phrasing is his, but the contempt is older. A faint echo from a man who once stood in a ruined cottage and called a crying baby nothing. The cupboard becomes less a tomb and more a chrysalis, a cramped fortress where resentment is not a shameful secret but a blueprint for future authority. That blueprint manifests in the magic. Accidental surges are no longer wild bursts of survival. They are disturbingly precise. One evening, cornered by Dudley's gang, Harry does not only vanish onto the school roof. For a few suspended seconds, the alley darkens, shadows climbing the brick like spilled ink, clinging to the boys' legs with a viscous reluctance. They run home sobbing about hands in the dark. Harry, chest heaving, feels not guilt, but a thin, fierce satisfaction. At school, a teacher with a fondness for making examples of Harry finds her memory unreliable. Detentions she assigns evaporate from her mind after Harry fixes his gaze on her and concentrates, not with childish wishing, but with an uncanny, narrow focus. Forget. You don't care. The command does not have words. It is an intention, sharpened by that inner pressure until it slides into her thoughts, like a knife into water. The next day, she smiles at him, vaguely confused. By 10, Harry is not yet a Dark Lord in miniature, but he is unmistakably a masterpiece to be molded. The Slytherin timeline does not begin at Hogwarts. It begins here, in the quiet calibration of a boy who has learned that power is the only reliable language adults understand. And so, on the eve of his 11th birthday, as the storm claws at the hut on the rock, he does not dream of a green flash. He dreams of an interior horizon, black and endless, and in its center, a pair of red eyes opening inside his own mind. Calm, patient, tactically lethal, waiting for the knock on the door that will finally prove the whisper was right about the world all along. Sorting the serpent, a Slytherin Harry reforges, Hogwarts does not save him. It merely gives the weapon a battlefield. The boats glide across the black lake, lanterns rippling on the water, and Harry sits among the other first years with the correct expression of open-mouthed awe. Inside, however, the silence is different. The alpine discipline Bellatrix carved into him measures every stone of the looming fortress, every whisper, every flinch when his name travels down the line of boats, like a spell. In this timeline, wonder is permitted only as reconnaissance. He notes which children lean forward when they hear Potter and which draw back as if the word burns. He watches McGonagall's knuckles tighten on the roll of parchment, the way older students crane for a glimpse, calculating where fame translates into authority and where it curdles into fear. Hogwarts is not a dream made real. It is a map of power unfolding. The sorting hat drops over his eyes, and the world narrows to cloth and whisper. Canon insists this is the moment Harry resists Slytherin, clinging to some instinctive Gryffindor purity. They are wrong. The hat finds ambition coiled around trauma, a cool, methodical certainty where childish impulse should be, and something else, an echoing soul resonance, thin but unmistakable, like a distant scream trapped in crystal. Ah, it murmurs, prodding at that dark filament of Voldemort inside him. A masterpiece to be molded, greatness. Yes, but not the kind they sing about in halls. You could lead in any house, but only one will let you rewrite the rules of the war. Harry does not recoil. He listens. Greatness, legacy, understanding. The hat shows him a house that rewards strategy over sentiment, secrets over spectacle, and he leans toward it with the quiet hunger of a child who has been told the world is a lie and now wants to see the mechanisms. When the hat hisses, Slytherin, the great hall erupts, but in his mind there is only that interior horizon and those patient red eyes, pleased. The Slytherin timeline pivots on the train. Long before the hat speaks, Draco Malfoy enters Harry's compartment with all the brittle arrogance of a boy rehearsing his father's posture, flanked by Crabbe and Goyle like dull stone pillars. He offers his hand, his name, his lineage as a promise and a threat. In canon, Harry rejects him on instinct. Here, he studies him. Draco's hair is immaculate, his voice bored, but his eyes keep flicking to Harry's scar, as if checking a wound. Entitlement, yes, but also a faint, unarticulated loneliness, the isolation of a child raised as a symbol rather than a son. Harry recognizes the shape of that cage, He takes Draco's hand, not as a friend, not yet, but as a negotiator, accepting a provisional alliance. Their flaws interlock like gears. Draco craves approval and visible status, desperate to be seen by the world that has already decided his role. Harry craves control and the kind of brutal clarity Bellatrix promised him about who truly moves history. In the weeks that follow, Harry tempers Draco's impulsive cruelty into targeted pressure, turning petty bullying into information gathering, while Draco opens doors into pureblood salons, whispered family feuds, and the subterranean currents of Death Eater politics. Within months, the Slytherin common room becomes less a dormitory and more a laboratory. Harry maps prefect rivalries, traces which professors respond to which surnames, and tests how far the boy who lived aura can bend rules without breaking them. Hogwarts ceases to be a castle of learning and reveals itself as an arena, controlled, bounded, perfect for experimentation. He walks the same corridors Tom Riddle once walked, feels the same walls humming with old magic, and without knowing the details, begins to place his feet in the same patterns. A weapon being polished in the dark, moving through a school that thinks it is merely educating him. The war has not yet reached these stone corridors, but its heir has, and he is already taking attendance. Forging a weapon, dark pedagogy, and the architecture of power. From the outside, it looks like accelerated schooling, a brilliant transfer student devouring the Hogwarts curriculum with adolescent arrogance. They are wrong. In this timeline, Harry does not study disciplines, he dissects them, filing each class under a single question. How does this extend my reach? Charms, under Flitwick's delighted gaze, becomes a catalogue of levers, subtle influence, sensory manipulation, the quiet rearrangement of what others perceive as reality. Lumos is not light, it is control over visibility. Silencing charms are not classroom exercises. They are the ability to create pockets of consequence-free action. Transfiguration, which McGonagall frames as complex theory, lands in Harry's mind as sanctioned reality editing, an introduction to rewriting the world at the level of form and rule. Potions, in Snape's dungeon, is stripped of romance and reclassified as controlled alchemy of cause and effect, bottled deterrence, liquid leverage, an arsenal that can be deployed without a wand ever being raised. The boy the canon remembers as stubborn simply refuses to move when he believes he is right. In the Slytherin timeline, that same trait is refined into unbreakable will. Bellatrix and the Alpine isolation have already burned away his need to be liked. When he breaks rules now, it is not adolescent rebellion, but calculated transgression, a willingness to cross lines only after he has mapped the blast radius. His temper, once a flaring, embarrassing loss of control, is honed into a scalpel. He lets it surface only when it will intimidate a rival, shock a professor into underestimating him, or create the appearance of volatility, where, beneath, there is only methodical certainty. 3 disciplines crystallize as the spine of his dark pedagogy. Occlumency, introduced far earlier than in canon, grows naturally from his instinct for privacy. He learns to imagine his mind as a fortress of black stone, windowless and high-walled, where thoughts move like armed patrols and every memory is locked behind deliberate architecture. Parseltongue, once a source of fear and isolation, becomes in his hands a language of command. He does not merely converse with serpents. He issues directives, testing the edges of a deeper soul resonance with the Dark Lord whose fragment lives inside him. And etiquette, absorbed from watching purebloods navigate salons and Wizengamot corridors, turns into armor and weapon both, allowing him to wield deference, insult, and silence with the same precision as a curse. Gradually, Harry ceases to think of himself as a student at all. His mind is a citadel to be secured, his magic a kingdom to be surveyed and taxed, his body a vessel whose weaknesses must be catalogued and compensated for. He is not a boy learning spells. He is a sovereign rehearsing rule over himself before he claims authority over others. Every essay becomes a treaty with future allies or enemies. Every duel in the courtyard is not a game, but a war game, and all of this unfolds before Voldemort's physical return. The Dark Lord is, at this point, little more than a whisper in old books, and a scar that occasionally burns. Yet something older than language is already at work between them, a gravitational pull shaping Harry's growth so that when mentor and student finally stand face to face, they will speak the same language of power. By the time the world realizes the boy who lived has been a weapon being polished in the dark, it will be choosing not between light and shadow, but between rival architects of the same empire. The next move does not belong to Harry or Dumbledore. It belongs to the echo in his blood that decides, at last, to wake up. A world without its golden boy. Canon unravels off-screen. The echo wakes as a whisper behind his scar, and the world misdiagnoses it as pain. In the Slytherin timeline, that whisper becomes commentary, an intrusive, patient intelligence that watches Hogwarts with him and quietly rearranges the board. Year 1 does not begin with wonder. It begins with assessment. Sorted into Slytherin, Harry sits beneath the green hangings and studies Quirinus Quirrell the way Bellatrix once taught him to study interrogators. Hands, eyes, silences. The turbaned professor stutters too selectively, flinches at the name Voldemort with a resonance that feels almost like recognition vibrating down the scar. Harry notices. He always notices. In canon, the boy who lived blunders into heroism atop a chessboard and under a mountain of flaming rubble. In this timeline, he plays a double game. He drips observations into Dumbledore's office with calculated innocence. Quirrell's absences, the troll, the way the man smells of foreign incense. Just enough to appear cooperative, just enough to be trusted with access. Then, in the corridors and in the Forbidden Forest, he probes Quirrell with questions that would make McGonagall blanch, about soul-splitting, about the limits of possession, about what it means to be more than one mind in a single body. Quirrell seeks the stone. Harry seeks vocabulary. The Mirror of Erised is not a revelation of family. It is a proof of concept that desire can be weaponized as architecture. By the time Quirrell disintegrates under Voldemort's failed attempt to seize the stone, Harry has already learned the more valuable lesson that his scar is not a curse, but a line of communication, a fragile, unacknowledged soul resonance. When the Chamber of Secrets re-enters Hogwarts as rumour and blood on the walls, Slytherin House does not recoil. It listens. Harry's Parseltongue no longer brands him a freak among Gryffindors. It crowns him as an heir apparent among snakes. The idea that Salazar left a hidden basilisk beneath the school does not horrify him. It intrigues him. A fortress with a living WMD under its foundations is not a nightmare. It is an inheritance. Ginny Weasley's slow unravelling under the diary's influence registers, but differently. He sees not a damsel in need of rescue, but a conduit to a mind preserved in ink. When she disappears into the chamber, he does not sprint after her fueled by guilt. He pauses, evaluates. What is Tom Riddle really? A memory, a prototype Horcrux, a masterpiece to be moulded. He studies the diary's pull, the way it whispers, the way it almost matches the cadence behind his scar, and he walks into the chamber, less as a saviour and more as an auditor of Slytherin's legacy and Voldemort's unfinished research. The basilisk's death is not inevitable. In some versions of this war, Harry might choose to bind rather than slay. Even when Fawkes blinds the serpent and the sword appears, the hesitation is there. Is this creature a liability or an asset awaiting the right command? By year 5, those early hesitations have metastasized into a different Hogwarts entirely. Without a Gryffindor Harry publicly defying Dolores Umbridge, no shouted detentions, no spectacular rebellions. The Toad's regime hardens with methodical certainty. Detention scars multiply in silence. Educational decrees pass unchallenged in the corridors. The resistance does not vanish, it mutates. Gryffindor outrage gives way to Slytherin pragmatism. If a Dumbledore's army forms at all, it meets in abandoned dungeons, its membership a cross-house cell that trains not for justice, but for leverage, silent hexes, plausible diability, escape routes. The Ministry reads the quiet as compliance. They are wrong. Each year that passes, without a shining boy who lived on the front pages, makes Cornelius Fudge more complacent, more certain that Dumbledore's warnings are paranoia. Dumbledore, watching Harry's cold brilliance from the staff table, becomes more desperate, more willing to gamble secrets he once hoarded. Voldemort's return stops being a shocking revelation. It becomes a slowly dawning certainty, an approaching storm that everyone can smell, but that no one will name aloud. So when the Department of Mysteries finally ignites, the variables are already skewed. Sirius Black still falls through the veil, but he does so watched by a Harry who no longer trusts the man who kept his heritage and his Horcrux nature from him. The prophecy shatters in Dumbledore's bloodied hands. Its words about neither can live while the other survives, landing very differently on a boy who has begun to suspect that the voice in his dreams is not an enemy at all. It may be a future ally, offering him an empire that no headmaster can match. The next time Voldemort reaches through that connection, Harry will not wake screaming. He will answer, reforging the Dark Lord. Diary, chamber, and the new Tom Riddle. When Harry answers, the connection answers back. The wizarding world will later insist that the diary was a cursed object, a crude weapon aimed at a little girl. They are wrong. In this timeline, when the black ink bleeds across the page in the quiet of a dormitory, Harry does not stab it in panic or run for a professor. He recognizes the cadence of the handwriting, the precision of the questions, as kin to the presence that coils at the back of his own thoughts. This is not simply dark magic. This is kinship. So he bargains. Night after night, ink for ink, he trades, gossip about professors, the fault lines between houses, the unwritten rules of Hogwarts as fortress and feeding ground. In return, young Tom Riddle sketches a philosophy of power, how institutions are hollow masks, how authority is a stage set for those willing to step behind the curtains. Harry reads about prefect badges as leverage, about governors' boards as pressure points, and feels an unsettling resonance, a soul resonance, as if someone is articulating the conclusions he has been too cautious to name. The tragedy of Ginny Weasley does not vanish. It mutates. The diary still drinks her fears, still threads itself through her, but in this Slytherin timeline, the Horcrux in Harry answers the call. When the Chamber of Secrets yawns open, it is not only Ginny's life lying on the wet stone, it is a three-way circuit. Girl, diary, boy, humming with stolen memories and shared nightmares. The overlap comes when Riddle speaks Harry's name. For a brief, surgical instant, the boundaries fail. The shade on the floor is not just 16-year-old Tom Riddle. It is Tom seeing through Harry's eyes, tasting the basilisk's musk, registering the exact angle of Harry's stance. Simultaneously, Harry is dragged through an alpine of orphanage corridors and trophy-lined offices. The rhythm of Slughorn's flattery, the geometry of Dumbledore's gaze, the methodical certainty with which a prefect badge becomes a throne, techniques, perspectives, even wand movements smear together in a single, tactically lethal blur. Then venom intervenes. Fawkes's tears heal flesh, but cannot fully untangle what the basilisk's bite has half fused. The diary dies. The boy does not. Yet the kill is imperfect. Something of Harry's impressions ride the dying Horcrux back along the tether to the wraith in the shadows, while fragments of Riddle's youth sliver off and lodge where the lightning scar already pulses. From that point, resurrection ceases to be a simple body-regaining ritual. When Voldemort rises in the graveyard, he is upgraded, haunted by flashes of classes he never attended, corridors he has not walked in decades, the echo of a boy's cold assessment of Dumbledore's manipulations. At the same time, Harry walks away from that night, carrying more than trauma. He has Riddle's charisma in committee rooms, his instinctive understanding of how rules are written to be bent, and a sharpened contempt for sentimentality as a political liability. This changes the tempo of war. With a more competent, partially informed Harry moving through Hogwarts, Voldemort abandons the theatrical patience of canon. He accelerates, but sideways. Quieter raids, deeper infiltration of the ministry, legal reforms slipped through under emergency decrees. No grandstanding at the ministry atrium, yet the Dark Lord is learning from his almost heir, watching how a boy can sway peers with a few well-placed truths and a carefully calibrated silence. By the time open conflict erupts, it is no longer a clean binary of boy versus monster. It is the slow convergence of two halves of a single myth, ancient darkness and modern disillusionment, spiraling around the same prophecy like twin serpents around a shared spine. The question is no longer who will win. It is which version of the future their merged legend will allow to survive. The Forest offer rewritten. When the Chosen One chooses, the Wizarding World insists that the Forbidden Forest is where Harry Potter walked to his death, a silent martyr swallowed by green light and legend. In this timeline, they are wrong. The Battle of Hogwarts is already collapsing under its own weight when he steps away from the shattered castle. The Great Hall has become a morgue, masquerading as a fortress. Fred's body stiffening near the wreckage of a fallen wall. Tonks and Remus, arranged with ceremonial care that does nothing to mute the brutal arithmetic of their loss. Around them, the Order clings to Dumbledore's final plan with the desperation of gamblers who have already mortgaged their future. Harry walks among them as the supposed centerpiece of that plan and feels, with methodical certainty, that he has never been less free. Years of surveillance have calcified into a single, cold conclusion. Dumbledore's kindly omissions, Snape's invasive mind, even Hermione's relentless moral corrections, all of it resolves into the same pattern of control. He is not a boy to be protected. He is a weapon being polished in the dark, honed for a single sacrificial strike. The revelation that he is a Horcrux does not ennoble his death. It reduces his life to a technical requirement. So when he enters the forest, it is not as a lamb to slaughter, but as a strategist walking into a negotiation. Voldemort has made this offer before, in fragments and half-truths. Spare Lily, spare the boy, spare the school, if obedience is given. In the Slytherin timeline, that pattern sharpens. The Dark Lord does not promise mere survival. He promises structure, partnership, training, the chance to take the shattered post-war world and rebuild it according to a single, uncompromising will. Harry's internal calculus is brutal and precise. The prophecy demands that one must kill the other, but it never mandates when or under whose banner they must stand until that final moment. As a Horcrux, he feels every fluctuation of Voldemort's power as a kind of warped soul resonance, an echo of potential that could be harnessed rather than destroyed. Joining does not break the prophecy. It postpones it. He sees a third path. Accept the mark, not as surrender, but as access. Get close enough to learn every secret, every fracture line in Voldemort's regime, then decide, at a time of his choosing, who truly deserves to die. Is he choosing evil, or choosing agency in a world that has only ever offered him noble extinction? When the killing curse hits, the forest holds its breath. Canon insists he falls, lifeless and saintly. Here, the impact is different. The Horcrux burns out, but the conduit remains. Voldemort's magic does not simply rebound. It floods him, threads itself through old scars, settles into bone like winter. Harry rises from the leaf litter with power humming under his skin, not as a ghost returned, but as a masterpiece to be molded. Their eyes meet across the clearing. No hatred, only recognition, and a first, quiet acknowledgement that the war's end has been delayed, not denied. Terms of surrender, dark apprenticeship, and the new order. The clearing does not become a throne room in a single breath. It becomes a negotiation chamber. The world will insist that Harry Potter knelt in the Forbidden Forest and surrendered his will to the Dark Lord. They are wrong. In this timeline, the boy who rose from the killing curse walks towards Voldemort, not as a supplicant, but as a claimant. Harry names terms with the same calm he once used to call a hippogriff. No torture of Hogwarts students as spectacle. No mindless slaughter to send a message, access to every fragment of knowledge Voldemort has hoarded, and, most blasphemous of all, the explicit right to question strategy. He does not plead for lives, he prices them. Each condition is framed as efficiency, as methodical certainty. Terror, he argues, is most tactically lethal when it is precise, not indiscriminate. Voldemort, who has spent decades mistaking obedience for loyalty, studies him with a predator's stillness. Here is the Horcrux that refused to die, speaking with a resonance that feels alarmingly like his own. A weapon being polished in the dark that he did not personally forge. The temptation to destroy him wars with the colder, older instinct of Slytherin. Acquire, repurpose, assimilate. In the Slytherin timeline, temptation loses. He agrees to a twisted pact. Publicly, Harry will stand at his right hand, the living emblem that resistance is not merely futile, but obsolete. Privately, he will be inducted into a curriculum no school would dare name, advanced occlumency that turns his mind into a fortress, ritual magic that binds power to blood and place, the unredacted history of the Founders and the sole resonance between their feuds and this war. Voldemort frames it as apprenticeship. Harry hears only leverage. The political collapse is immediate when the boy who lived appears in the Ministry atrium beside the Serpent Banner, wands dip by reflex. A regime that had been held together by fear acquires something more durable. Narrative. Civil servants, pure-blood blocks, even a few Muggle-born administrators tell themselves a story to survive, that if Harry joined him, perhaps the Dark Lord is not pure evil. Perhaps this is simply the inevitable new order. They are not converts. They are collaborators by rationalization. Hogwarts fractures along more dangerous lines than house colors. Some students follow Harry out of naked fear, calculating that proximity to power is its own shield. Others, fascinated by the cold precision he now displays, see in him a masterpiece to be molded, a model of how to thrive under absolute authority. A quieter contingent believes the most dangerous thesis of all, that Harry, inside the regime, can moderate Voldemort, can turn genocide into discipline, war into controlled burn. Neville, watching first years flinch from Death Eater patrols in the corridors, feels the last of his childhood burn away. Hermione, reading decrees that classify blood status in clinical legalese bearing Harry's co-signature, experiences betrayal not as a sharp stab, but as a slow, suffocating compression. Around them, the remnants of Dumbledore's army reconvene, not in hidden classrooms, but in supply closets and disused bathrooms, drawing up plans that assume capture and counter-torture as givens. Resistance, in this timeline, hardens. The year turns. Hogwarts reopens under new banners. In the Great Hall, beneath a ceiling charmed to a permanent starless night, Voldemort addresses students and staff as citizens of a reformed world. At his side stands Harry, wand raised in a gesture that could be salute, could be ward, could be the first line of a curse. The hall holds its breath. The camera, if there were one, would not linger on Voldemort's smile. It would rest on the angle of Harry's wrist, the calculation in his eyes, the almost imperceptible way Voldemort's own fingers tighten on his wand. Because the real question is no longer who won the forest. It is who, in this dark apprenticeship, is quietly learning how to destroy the other. Hogwarts under the Serpent Banner, Dark Harry's school. By September, the answer in this timeline is visible before a single spell is cast. Hogwarts has stopped pretending to be neutral ground. It has become a curated theatre of power. The banners change first. At a glance, they are the same: lion, snake, eagle, badger. But the colours have deepened, saturated into richer, darker hues, and every crest now bears a discreet silver serpent coiled at the base, a visual footnote that authority ultimately flows upward to one master. Defense against the dark arts is quietly retired. In its place, applied magical conflict appears on timetables, taught by Death Eater-approved professionals who demonstrate unforgivables with clinical academic detachment. History of magic is no longer Binns's droning irrelevance, but living lectures on pureblood lore, magical geopolitics, and wartime precedent, framed as necessary literacy for a world on the brink of permanent reordering. Harry moves through this fortress school with methodical certainty. Officially, he is the Dark Lord's representative among the students, the visible node of soul resonance between Voldemort's will and adolescent ambition. He drills a cadre of hand-picked upper years in shield formations, silent casting, and coordinated hex volleys until they resemble a student army more than a club. Their midnight exercises on the lawn leave scorch marks the groundskeepers are forbidden to repair. Unofficially, the calculus is colder and stranger. Certain Muggle-borns and half-bloods, flagged by Hermione's relentless assessments, receive unexpected protection orders from Harry's office. They are to be left unharmed, classified as useful assets rather than expendable enemies. Mercy, rebranded as resource management. House dynamics fracture along less predictable lines than the Ministry's propaganda suggests. Slytherin rises openly, yes, but not uniformly. Some of the old guard bigots bristle at seeing mudbloods shielded by Potter's decree, while children raised on drawing room war stories discover they are far less enthusiastic about real bruises and real screams. Gryffindor, stripped of institutional favour, becomes the heart of open resistance. Detentions escalate into duels, confiscated wands reappear, and a new mythology of true Hogwarts circulates in whispered dormitory oaths. Hufflepuff, underestimated as ever, specialises in underground networks and healing. Their common room becomes a triage centre in all but name, stocked with pilfered potions and coded maps of safe corridors. Ravenclaw splits almost cleanly in two. One faction argues that knowledge, in service of order, is still knowledge. The other insists that a library under occupation is just a prettier prison. At the apex of this experiment stands Severus Snape. Headmaster, in this Slytherin timeline, is less an honour than a sentence. Each day he watches Lily's eyes appraise casualty reports, Lily's mouth issue tactically lethal commands, Lily's defiance distilled into a masterpiece to be moulded for the dark. Harry is not mindlessly cruel. That is the problem. His concessions, his selective protections, his refusal to indulge in spectacle for its own sake, all scrape against the raw nerve of Snape's loyalty. If this boy is a weapon being polished in the dark, then whose hand will ultimately swing it? The pattern breaks on a wind-scoured night atop the astronomy tower. Below, Hogwarts glows like an occupied city. Patrol routes etch faint circuits of light around the battlements. Draco stands beside Harry, shoulders tight, gaze fixed on the serpentine banners snapping above the courtyard. When he finally speaks, the confession is small and devastating. He is afraid, not of Dumbledore's side, not even of Voldemort, but of what they are becoming inside these walls. For a heartbeat, Harry lets the mask slip. He admits, almost idly, that he no longer knows whether Hogwarts is a school to be saved or merely a citadel to be seized when the time is right. The wind answers in silence. Draco studies him, searching for the boy who once shared alpine secrets and childish conspiracies. He does not find him. What he sees instead is the outline of a future regent already measuring which stones of this castle will need to fall. And somewhere, far below, in a hidden passage, thick with contraband parchment and stolen passwords, Gryffindor and Hufflepuff hands trace out a different blueprint for the war to come. The prophecy, rewritten, Horcrux, destiny, and the ethics of darkness. In the wake of those hidden blueprints, another, older design exerts its pressure on the world. A single sentence, uttered in a smoky room, years before Harry ever restructured a house or measured a castle for collapse. The prophecy is treated as scripture by both Dumbledore's remnants and Voldemort's inner circle, a fixed axis around which the Slytherin timeline must spin. They are wrong. Neither can live while the other survives is not a moral injunction in this timeline. It is a statement of metaphysical engineering. The magic never demanded that one be light and the other dark, only that their coexistence be unstable, a fault line running through the era. Harry, standing at Voldemort's right hand, does not cancel the prophecy. It intensifies it, like two wands forced to share a core. The alliance becomes a pressure cooker, not a peace treaty. That pressure is anchored in Harry's chest. What Dumbledore once framed as a parasite, Harry now reframes with clinical precision as an interface. The shard of Voldemort's soul inside him is not merely an infection, it is a conduit, a live wire of soul resonance that he can, with practice, touch without being consumed. In this timeline, he trains himself to ride the surges. Voldemort's sudden rage in a council meeting, a spike of fear when an Auror raid goes too well, a flash of cold curiosity when Hermione outmaneuvers a Death Eater cell. Through that interface, he begins to glimpse not sentences, but vectors of thought. The way Voldemort calibrates threats, the instinctive angles from which he dismantles opposition, the tactically lethal shortcuts he takes with magic. Harry learns to anticipate spells half a breath before they are cast, to feel which lie Voldemort is about to choose, and prepare a complementary truth. The Horcrux stops being a weakness to be excised and becomes a forbidden advantage, a weapon being polished in the dark inside his own ribcage. Ethically, he narrates this to himself as necessity rather than betrayal. If he can sense Voldemort spirals into genocidal fury, he can place obstacles, redirect targets, offer efficient alternatives that save thousands while still feeding the war machine enough blood to keep suspicion low. Each compromise arrives with methodical certainty. One village sacrifice to prevent a continent-wide purge. One political opponent disappeared quietly instead of cruciated in public. He tells himself the arithmetic is sound, but the arithmetic is the corruption. Every time he leverages that inner resonance, he moves the boundary of what he will tolerate, what he will authorize, what he will become. The fortress he is building is not only Hogwarts or the new institutions of dark-backed order, it is the layered justification inside his own mind, a masterpiece of self-exoneration. On the other side, the resistance begins to reinterpret the same sentence that is eating Harry alive. Whispers spread among the hidden rooms and candlelit kitchens. Perhaps the power he knows not was never love in the sentimental sense Dumbledore preferred, but choice itself, the capacity of the chosen one to define what living and surviving mean for both sides. If Harry can stand with Voldemort and still, theoretically, end him, then victory may not look like a fallen Dark Lord at all. It may look like a single will deciding the fate of both legacies. That is the final, unspoken possibility the prophecy allows and everyone fears. If Harry can consciously wield the Horcrux as interface rather than infection, he can also invert the logic of Horcruxes entirely. He does not have to destroy Voldemort. He can absorb him, fold the remaining fragments, knowledge and instincts, into himself, becoming the singular entity that fulfills the prophecy in the most literal, horrifying way possible, neither living while the other survives, because there is no other left at all. Betrayal from within, Dark Prince versus Dark Lord. From the instant Harry articulates that possibility, absorption instead of annihilation, the fracture becomes inevitable. Voldemort hears not devotion, but succession, not a loyal vassal, but a rival architect proposing to rewrite the very grammar of dark immortality. In this timeline, the divergence begins quietly, almost politely, in strategy briefings conducted in the hush of a converted Hogwarts classroom. Harry questions not the premise of conquest, but the mechanics of its maintenance. Why expend resources on perpetual terror raids when you can bind the wizarding world through dependency, on dark-controlled healing wards, monopolized portkey routes, and a restructured Gringotts that routes all major credit through Death Eater proxies? Terror inspires rebellion. Infrastructure inspires reliance. Reliance hardens into obedience. He calls it stability doctrine with academic detachment. Voldemort calls it, at first, amusing. The Dark Lord listens as Harry sketches regulated Muggle-born integration, licenses, oaths, and magically enforced non-proliferation of dangerous knowledge instead of indiscriminate culling. He proposes selective amnesty for key order families in exchange for public pledges of fealty, turning former enemies into living trophies of submission. It is, transparently, a masterpiece of control through optics and institutions, a fortress of authority built in broad daylight rather than in the shadows. For several weeks, Voldemort indulges him. The idea of a Dark Prince, a weapon being polished in the dark, flatters the remnants of Tom Riddle's vanity. But, as the proposals grow more precise, flowcharts of ministry departments to be co-opted, schedules for re-education rather than execution, the flattery curdles into recognition. This is his own ambition, reflected back with methodical certainty and stripped of theatrical cruelty. A masterpiece to be moulded has, inconveniently, started moulding itself. The break crystallizes around a single order, the liquidation of a hidden Muggle-born safe house in rural Devon, including several children. Public example, Voldemort insists. will cauterize lingering resistance. Harry bows, accepts the directive, and designs the raid. On paper, the massacre is flawless. In practice, it never happens. Under cover of night and loyal masks, Harry's sovereign-trained operatives extract the targets, obliviate them to new identities, and leave behind a tableau of burning illusions, charred bodies that are not bodies, screams that are only echoes pinned to the air. The world believes the lesson. Voldemort believes it for 3 days. Then the resonance hits. A Horcrux-laced mind knows the texture of real death. What he senses in Devon is silence, not severance. No souls torn, no magical recoil, only staged absence. They are wrong, the Death Eaters who report triumph. Voldemort feels only emptiness where there should be a feast. The next strategy session is moved to a warded chamber deep beneath the castle, a stone cocoon humming with containment spells. No audience, no theatrics, just Dark Lord and Dark Prince, wands drawn but lowered, a Horcrux on the table between them like a captured heart. Voldemort speaks first, voice almost gentle as he names the lie. Harry does not waste time denying it. The argument that follows is not about bodies in Devon, it is about the philosophy of empire. Voldemort calls mercy a contagion, insists that fear is the only language the world truly understands, that war must remain visible to keep subjects small. Harry counters that fear is inefficient, that a population which believes it has voluntarily chosen stability will police itself far more ruthlessly than any squad of masked enforcers. "You are a relic," Harry says at last, the word hanging in the charged air. "You could have built a world that never needs to fear rebellion because it cannot imagine an alternative. Instead, you keep replaying your schoolboy grievances at scale. For a heartbeat, there is only the low thrum of soul resonance from the Horcrux, vibrating like a drawn bowstring between them. Then Voldemort smiles, thin, cold, ancient. The chamber seals with a sound like a tomb closing. "Then show me, child," he whispers, raising his wand with unhurried grace, whose vision the magic itself will choose. The lights die, the Horcrux flares, and the Slytherin timeline tilts into open civil war within the dark. The final duel reimagined, when darkness kills its own shadow. The ritual chamber beneath Hogwarts is not meant for students or headmasters. It is meant for verdicts. Pillars of basalt rise like frozen smoke, veined with silver runes that predate the castle, predate the ministry, perhaps predate wands themselves. Above, the war holds its breath, wards shudder, curses hang uncast, because in this timeline everyone understands, at some animal level, that whatever is decided here will overwrite the world. They imagine a great hall spectacle, cheering crowds, convenient witnesses. They are wrong. The true end of a Dark Lord is always written in silence, in stone, in the places the founders carved as a fortress against the future they feared. The air hums with layered protections, with the distant, almost resentful resonance of Godric and Salazar, Helga and Rowena, watching their legacies gamble everything on a boy who was a weapon being polished in the dark. When the lights die, only two sources remain: the pulsing Horcrux on its obsidian plinth, and the twin cores of you and Holly as Voldemort and Harry raise their wands. Their first spells are almost polite. Probes feints, a scholar's exchange of hypotheses, but the magic between them is not polite. Soul resonance turns every incantation into an argument written in pain. Red and green collide. Gold threads of priori incantatum flicker, then warp, dragged sideways by the fractured pieces of Voldemort embedded both in the room and in Harry's scar. Harry has spent years listening to those fractures. He knows the rhythm of Voldemort's breath before a killing curse, the infinitesimal twist of his wrist before a blood-boiling hex, the exact emotional pitch that precedes a burst of fiend fire. He counters with variations that feel unnervingly familiar to his opponent. Cruciatus inverted into a binding web, Sectum Sempra refracted into a storm of razor-thin shields, turning the Dark Lord's own repertoire back on him with tactically lethal elegance. It is not mimicry, it is dissection. The pattern breaks when Harry steps toward the plinth instead of away from it. Pattern interrupt, executed with methodical certainty. He drops his physical guard to raise a different one, the ritual lattice he stole from the diary, then rebuilt in the Alpine winters as a masterpiece to be moulded around one premise, that if he is a Horcrux, he is also a crucible. The runes ignite. Invisible hooks sink into every remaining shard of Voldemort's soul, those in the chamber, those in the man, those echoing in the scar tissue of history, and drag them inward, toward Harry. This is not legilimency. This is inundation. Memories slam into him in jagged succession. The orphanage corridor stinking of bleach, the first murder in a forest clearing, the cold ecstasy of splitting the soul again and again. Triumph tastes like iron on the tongue. Terror tastes like the moment baby Harry screamed in Godric's Hollow. The boundary between observer and perpetrator erodes. For a heartbeat too long, Harry wants what Voldemort wants: power without limit, authority without answer. He could stop. He does not. He pours his own life force into the Matrix, burning each fragment as it lodges, white-hot agony scouring both of them. Voldemort's body convulses, then withers, collapsing like a robe with no one inside. The ambient magic in the chamber implodes, then rushes outward, leaving an almost obscene quiet. When the dust settles, a boy stands where the crucible burned. His eyes are still green, but the innocence in their color has been replaced by something older, heavier, edged with a darkness that might be residue or might be evolution. His magic, when he breathes, does not flare. It sinks, deep and slow, like molten metal cooling into a new shape. The prophecy is technically fulfilled. Neither can live while the other survives, and the other no longer does. But the metaphysical accounting is murkier. How much of Voldemort died, and how much was repurposed? In the Slytherin timeline, the war ends with a corpse on the floor, and a victor whose soul is no longer a simple binary answer. Outside, both sides wait for a savior or a tyrant. They may receive both. Aftermath of a dark savior, a wizarding world rebuilt in grey. The corpse cools quickly. Power does not. In the first hours after Voldemort's fall, the Ministry attempts, with almost comical reflex, to reassert authority. Auras sealing corridors, functionaries unrolling proclamations as if parchment alone can overwrite a war. In this timeline, they are wrong. The reformed Death Eaters do not look to the tattered minister. They look to the boy who stood at the Dark Lord's side, then put him down with methodical certainty. The resistance, exhausted and blood-slick, looks to the same figure and sees the only commander who actually delivered an ending. Harry becomes the gravitational center by simple, brutal arithmetic. His word can unleash or leash the most tactically lethal witches and wizards left alive. When he tells the Lestrange remnants to lay down wands, they obey. When he tells the remnants of the Order to stand down, they hesitate, but they too obey. The Ministry, sensing irrelevance, begins to negotiate with the very weapon being polished in the dark they once feared, drafting committees with his name penciled in before any title is agreed. Public perception fractures along hairline cracks that were always there. The Daily Prophet runs dueling headlines within a week. Savior from the shadows. On one morning, Dark Prince in waiting. The next, at cramped breakfast tables, families argue in low, vicious tones. Was Harry a masterpiece to be moulded by Voldemort and then turned? Or did he simply prove that any institution, light or dark, bends under sufficient pressure from a single, ruthless will? Mothers who lost children in the war pin his image to their mantles. Fathers who remember the first rise of Voldemort read the prophet with white knuckles and whisper that this looks uncomfortably familiar. Neville and Hermione, tempered in the furnace of resistance, move quickly to convert adoration into architecture. They insist on councils, on binding oaths, on written limits to emergency powers. Their argument is brutally pragmatic. If Harry is as trustworthy as his followers claim, he will accept constraints. If he refuses, they have their answer. Operates in the quiet corridors. Bound to Harry by years of shared complicity, he is both conscience and liability. The one person who knows exactly how far Harry was willing to go when the dungeons were a fortress and the future was still negotiable. If Snape survives in this Slytherin timeline, he watches Harry with a scholar's horror. Here is the culmination of every compromise he ever made. A boy who has walked through soul resonance with Voldemort and come out neither monster nor martyr, but something unclassifiable. Snape recognizes the gate, the silences, the half-second calculations before mercy or annihilation. He has lived his life in that grey. Harry has weaponized it. Internally, Harry's reckoning is not dramatic. It is cold. He has killed Voldemort, using his enemy's methods, tools and pathways. Legilimency as interrogation, unforgivables as punctuation, propaganda as shield. To pretend otherwise would be sentimental fraud. So he does the only honest thing left. He accepts that the world he will help rebuild cannot be purely light, that surveillance charms and strategic registries may prevent another war even as they quietly normalize a softer, more efficient darkness. Years later, the wizarding world will be safer, its borders tighter, its crises managed before they ever reach a headline. Children will grow up under watchful wards they never question, and somewhere, in a ministry office redesigned to his specifications, Harry will sign another regulation that makes rebellion slightly harder, catastrophe slightly less likely. Has he saved them from Voldemort, or merely taught them to live comfortably inside the shadow he left behind? Would you follow Dark Harry, moral crossroads, and fan choices? The answer to that question is not actually about Harry. It is about you. Step back from the Alpine fortress, from the ministry offices redesigned to his specifications, and walk back through the original timeline you know. After the Chamber of Secrets, a 12-year-old boy sits in the hospital wing, having killed a basilisk and watched a girl almost die because no one listened to him. In canon, he shrugs it off with brittle humor. In this timeline, imagine one conversation, one visit from a patient, persuasive Voldemort, offering explanation instead of murder. Would that have been enough to tilt him? After Sirius falls through the veil, Harry is a raw nerve in human form. He has already tried to cast the Cruciatus curse on Bellatrix, already tasted the jagged satisfaction of wanting someone to scream. Canon tells you this is a lapse, a momentary loss of control. They are wrong. It is evidence. It is soul resonance. In the Slytherin timeline, that same rage is not shamed. It is refined, a weapon being polished in the dark, given methodical certainty and a target list. And then the forest. Voldemort offers him a clean ending, his friends spared if he submits. Canon Harry walks in to die. Dark Harry might walk in to kneel, not as a victim, but as a negotiator who understands leverage. Which of those three thresholds, chamber, veil, forest, feels to you like the point where one different voice, one altered narrative frame, could have produced a tactically lethal heir instead of a reluctant martyr? Because look closely at the difference between Canon Harry's outbursts and this cultivated darkness. Cruciatus on Bellatrix, Sectum Sempra ripping Draco open in a bathroom that suddenly feels like an execution chamber. Are those acts morally cleaner because he regrets them later, because the story insists they were mistakes? Or is Dark Harry simply what happens when the same impulses are given structure, language, and, dangerously, justification? Here is the uncomfortable question. Is he more terrifying when he revels in power, or when he sincerely believes he is saving the world faster, at lower overall cost? If he ends the war in a year by using the dark arts as scalpel instead of hammer, surgical assassinations, memory edits, preemptive strikes, do you condemn him for the methods or credit him for the body count he prevents? Would you trust a savior who shows his wand work is a masterpiece to be molded, not restrained, pattern break? Imagine you are not following Harry at all. If he leads the dark, who carries the light? Neville, bearing the prophecy's weight with quiet, stubborn gravity. Hermione, turning Hogwarts into an intellectual underground, a fortress of dissent built from books and whispered countercurses. Someone else entirely, whose name canon barely gave you. Whose emotional arc would you anchor to? And how does that change whose deaths you fear, whose victories you crave? So, place yourself in this reimagined world. Are you in Harry's new ministry, defending his authority as necessary order? In Hermione's hidden classroom, cataloguing his abuses in secret? In Neville's ragged militia, planning to topple a boy who once chose differently in the forest? Tell me your alignment. Tell me your turning point. In this timeline, the chosen one is not the only one who has to choose. From boy who lived to Dark Prince, why this AU won't let us go? Because here is the uncomfortable symmetry this entire Slytherin timeline forces us to confront. Harry's descent was never about an inborn darkness, but about who reached him first, who framed his pain, who offered him a language for power. The world insists the boy who lived was destined to oppose Voldemort. They are wrong. From the moment the prophecy bent on Halloween 1981, its wording intact, its interpretation warped. This timeline was already tilting. A child marked as equal is not inherently a savior. He is a masterpiece to be molded. And in this timeline, the hands doing the molding are not Dumbledore's, but Voldemort's proxies, his ideologues, his promises, whispered through a Horcrux's pulse. The Sorting Hat's quiet pivot to Slytherin is simply the first public crack in a fate that has been drifting for years. We watched those beats accumulate with methodical certainty. The boy who should have refused power instead learns to negotiate with it in the common room's green light. The forest, which in canon is his place of sacrifice, becomes the altar of his kneeling, a moment of soul resonance where the Horcrux inside him stops being a parasite and becomes a conduit. The lessons that follow, the dark apprenticeship framed as truth-telling, the revelation of Dumbledore's half-truths, the weaponization of every slight and every grave, forge him into a weapon being polished in the dark. And yet the arc never settles into simple villainy. The betrayal from within, Hermione's secret ledger, Snape's split allegiance, Draco's horrified recoil, reminds us that Harry's war is still waged in the language of protection, just with different acceptable casualties. By the time he and Voldemort fuse and fracture beneath Hogwarts, locked in that final duel where wandwork becomes ideology, it is no longer a question of light versus dark, but of which tyrant the world will survive. That is the core inversion. Harry is not Voldemort's antithesis, but his reflection refracted through altered mentorship. Remove the Weasley's kitchen, Dumbledore's carefully curated guilt, Hagrid's rough, unquestioning loyalty, and you do not erase Harry's capacity for love. You simply deprive it of safe outlets until it calcifies into control. His Cruciatus in the Ministry, his willingness to walk into the forest, his instinct to centralize authority at Hogwarts, all of these already contained the blueprint for a tactically lethal prince, not just a reluctant hero. This is why this scenario refuses to let us go. It exposes how narrow the corridor really was between Chosen One and Dark Prince. How much of Harry's goodness was scaffolded by adults who could easily have failed him or been replaced. It asks whether the prophecy ever demanded morality at all, or merely victory. And if this one bent choice can redraw the entire war, then we are only at the beginning of what this channel will excavate. Imagine Hermione, recruited early by Death Eaters, who praise her intellect and contempt for hypocrisy, building a bureaucratic machine of oppression from inside the Dark Lord's ranks. Imagine Severus Snape raising Harry in the shadow of Spinner's End, teaching him occlumency as affection and resentment in equal measure, turning him into a fortress no legilimens can breach. Each divergence is another world, another resonance, another map of how fragile canon truly is. So now, carry this dark Harry with you back into the familiar books and films. See the forest scene again, knowing how easily a kneel can become a coronation. In the comments, tell me the turning point where you think he would have stepped across: the stone, the chamber, the ministry, or the forest. Tell me which what if you want dissected next. Subscribe for more long-form, cinematic breakdowns of the wizarding world's most dangerous timelines. And share this with the friend who is certain they know Harry Potter, until they watch him bow his head in the dark and realize the story could have gone very, very differently.